life, when you realize something powerful and unsettling at the same time, you can speak your truth perfectly, clearly, even gently, and still be misunderstood by those who have already decided who you are. And in that moment, something inside you begins to ask a deeper question. Why am I exhausting my voice trying to convince hearts that are not listening to understand, when I could be protecting the peace within me instead? The more you explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, the more you begin to notice a quiet erosion within your spirit. It does not happen loudly. It does not arrive like a storm that demands attention. Instead, it comes softly, like a slow leak in something you once believed was unbreakable. You start to feel it in the pauses between your words, in the exhaustion that follows conversations that should have ended long before you tried to make yourself clearer, and little by little, you realize that it was never clarity that was missing, it was willingness on the other side to receive it. There is a kind of pain that comes from speaking earnestly to someone who has already decided what your words will mean. No matter how carefully you choose them, no matter how honestly you offer them, they are filtered through assumptions that were never yours to begin with. And so you begin to stretch your truth, to reshape it, to soften its edges, hoping it will finally fit into a place where it was never meant to belong. But in doing so, you begin to drift away from yourself. And what is peace, if not the quiet alignment between who you are and how you allow yourself to be known? When you repeatedly explain yourself to those who have no intention of understanding, you begin to trade that peace for permission. Permission to be seen, permission to be accepted, permission to exist without distortion. But you were never meant to earn what is already your right. There comes a point when you must recognize that not every misunderstanding requires your voice, and not every misjudgment deserves your energy. Some people will only ever meet you through the limits of their own perspective, and no amount of explanation will expand a vision they refuse to open. This is not your burden to carry. Your responsibility is not to convince, but to live truthfully and let your life speak where your words are no longer honored. And so, slowly, wisely, you begin to withdraw your explanations not out of bitterness, but out of care for your own becoming. You begin to understand that peace is not found in being understood by everyone, but in no longer abandoning yourself in the attempt to be. And in that understanding, something sacred returns to you, the fullness of your voice, unburdened, unedited, and finally free. Not everyone deserves your story, and this is a truth that often arrives late, after too many moments of overgiving and too many instances of being misunderstood. There are people who do not listen to understand you. They listen to respond, to judge, to reshape your words into something you never intended them to be. And in their hands, your story becomes less like a living truth and more like a tool, something they turn over and over until it fits the version of you they have already created in their minds. When you offer your story to such spaces, hoping for empathy, you may instead find it used as evidence against your character, your choices, your heart. What was once tender and personal becomes sharpened into something that can wound you later. And so you begin to realize that vulnerability without discernment is not always healing. It can become exposure without safety. There is a difference between being open and being unguarded in places where your openness is not honored. You may feel at first that withholding your story is a kind of loss, as if you are denying yourself the relief of being known. But in time, you learn that protection is not silence born of fear. It is wisdom born of experience. You learn that every listener is not a keeper of truth, and every ear is not a place where your heart can safely rest. Some will hear you only to reduce you, not to understand you. And you are not obligated to give fragments of your soul to those who cannot hold them with care. There is a quiet strength in learning where your story belongs and where it does not. You begin to choose your words not from fear of being judged, but from respect for your own sacredness. You begin to understand that your life is not a public resource for every passing opinion, but a deeply personal unfolding that deserves reverence, not recklessness. And so you grow into a new kind of clarity. You stop offering explanations where there is no sincerity. You stop laying your truth into hands that have already decided how to break it apart. Instead, you hold it closer. You let it be shared only where it is received as it was meant to be, whole, human, and unaltered. In that choice, you do not become closed. You become intentional. And in that intention, you begin to reclaim something precious that was never meant to be scattered so freely. Your voice, your dignity, and the quiet authority of knowing that your story is not for everyone, but only for those who understand the responsibility of holding it with care. There is a point in life when you begin to understand that your energy is not an endless offering meant to be scattered into every space that demands it. It is something far more sacred than that, something quiet, powerful, and deeply alive within you. And yet, so often, you may find yourself giving it away in places where it is neither received with care nor returned with understanding. You begin to speak, to explain, to justify your presence as though your existence itself is something that must be approved before it can be accepted. But there is a weariness that comes from defending what should never have needed defense. When you are constantly required to prove your intentions, to clarify your character, to reintroduce your truth again and again to those who have already chosen not to see it, something within you begins to thin. Not all at once, not in a way that alarms you immediately, but gradually, like a flame burning too long without protection from the wind. And still, you persist, because the heart longs to be understood. It believes, sometimes stubbornly, that if it just explains itself one more time, if it just finds the perfect combination of words, then perhaps the misunderstanding will dissolve. But truth is not always received through effort. Some eyes are not closed by confusion, they are closed by choice. And no amount of explanation can open what refuses to soften. When you begin to recognize this, something within you starts to shift. You realize that your energy is not meant to be spent in endless circles of defense. It is meant to build, to create, to grow, to heal. It is meant for becoming, not for constant justification. And slowly, you start to understand that every moment you spend proving yourself to those who refuse to see you is a moment taken away from the life that is actually waiting for you to live it fully. There is a quiet dignity in no longer chasing validation from unwilling places. It is not indifference, it is awareness. It is the understanding that your worth does not increase when it is recognized, nor does it diminish when it is ignored. You remain who you are, whether or not they see you clearly. And so you begin to guard your energy not as an act of separation, but as an act of respect toward yourself. You stop entering conversations that drain your spirit without purpose. You stop reopening explanations that only lead you back into misunderstanding. Instead, you choose presence over persuasion, peace over proving, and clarity over chaos. In doing so, you do not become less open, you become more intentional. You begin to reserve your energy for places where it is met with honesty, where it is not questioned at every turn, where your existence is not something to be argued, but something to be honored. And in that space, you finally feel what it means to exist without defense, to simply be without apology, and to let your life speak so clearly that it no longer needs to explain itself at all. There is a moment in life when you begin to see that not every misunderstanding is born from confusion. Some of it is not accidental at all. It is deliberate, shaped by minds that have already decided who you are before you have even spoken. And when you step into such spaces, believing that clarity will heal what is broken, you slowly begin to realize that you are not in a conversation. You are in a cycle, one that keeps asking you to explain yourself while never truly listening to your answers. At first, you may not notice it. You may believe that if you just speak more carefully, if you just choose softer words, if you just try one more time, something will shift. But there are dialogues that are not built for understanding. They are built for resistance. Every explanation becomes another point of misinterpretation. Every clarification another reason to question your intent. And in this way, what appears to be communication is actually containment, an invisible trap that keeps you returning to prove something that was never open to being received. And so you find yourself repeating truths that should have been enough the first time. You begin to feel the exhaustion of standing in emotional courtrooms where the verdict was decided long before your arrival. No matter how honestly you speak, your words are weighed against assumptions that were never yours to carry. And slowly, you begin to understand that the issue is not your clarity, it is their refusal to meet you within it. There is a quiet awakening that comes when you recognize this pattern. It does not arrive with anger at first, but with clarity. You start to see how much of your energy has been spent trying to open doors that were never meant to open inward. And in that recognition, something powerful begins to happen. You stop stepping into every argument that asks you to diminish yourself in order to be heard. Not every conversation deserves your participation. Not every misunderstanding deserves your correction. Some exchanges are designed to pull you into cycles where you are always explaining but never arriving, always justifying but never being accepted. And when you stay too long in such cycles, you begin to lose sight of the simplicity of your own truth. There is strength in learning to recognize when dialogue becomes a trap. It is not about shutting people out of your life. It is about refusing to abandon yourself in spaces where understanding is not the goal. You begin to understand that peace is not found in winning every explanation, but in choosing not to enter battles that require you to shrink in order to participate. And so, you step back, not in defeat, but in wisdom. You learn to let silence interrupt what endless words could not fix. You learn to allow distance where clarity is consistently refused. And in doing so, you begin to reclaim something far more valuable than being understood by the wrong people. The quiet, steady freedom of no longer needing to prove yourself where your truth was never truly welcome. Growth often arrives quietly at first, not as a celebration, but as a realization. It does not announce itself with applause or certainty. Instead, it begins the moment you notice that what once felt necessary, explaining yourself, defending your intentions, proving your worth, no longer feels aligned with who you are becoming. You begin to sense that every time you step into endless justification, you are not building understanding, but slowly scattering pieces of your inner world into places that were never designed to hold them with care. There is a shift that happens when you start to see your inner world as something worth protecting rather than constantly presenting for approval. Before this shift, you may have believed that being understood required effort, repetition, and emotional labor. You may have thought that if you could just articulate yourself more perfectly, the misunderstanding would dissolve. But growth teaches you something quieter and far more honest, that some misunderstandings are not invitations to explain more, but signals to withdraw with wisdom. You begin to realize that proving yourself often pulls you further away from yourself. Each explanation given to the unwilling becomes another moment where your attention is turned outward instead of inward. And in that outward focus, you slowly lose touch with the stillness of your own truth. You start to live in reaction, shaping your voice around perceptions that were never grounded in who you actually are. Protecting your inner world does not mean shutting people out in bitterness. It means choosing carefully where your energy is allowed to enter and where it is allowed to remain untouched. It means recognizing that not every question deserves an answer, not every doubt deserves engagement, and not every misunderstanding deserves your presence. Some things resolve not through explanation, but through distance and clarity. There is a deep strength in learning to step back without needing to correct every distortion. It is a strength that does not shout or defend itself endlessly. Instead, it observes, understands, and chooses peace over participation in cycles that lead nowhere. You begin to see that your inner world, your thoughts, your emotions, your truth, is not something to be constantly exposed for validation, but something to be nurtured with intention. And in this nurturing, something changes within you. You become less reactive and more rooted. You stop rushing to fill every silence with explanation. You stop bending your truth to make it more acceptable to those who were never open to it in the first place. Instead, you begin to live from a place that is steady, unshaken by misunderstanding, unburdened by the need to be constantly understood. Growth, then, is not loud. It is the quiet decision to stop giving your inner world away in fragments to those who do not know how to hold it whole. It is the moment you realize that protection is not distance from people, but closeness to yourself. And in that closeness, you finally begin to experience what it means to live without constantly proving your right to exist as you are. The right people do not stand at a distance holding your truth hostage, waiting for you to defend it. They do not demand that you repeatedly justify the shape of your heart or the intention behind your silence. Instead, they recognize something quieter in you, something that does not need constant translation. There is a natural ease in their understanding, as though your presence speaks a language that does not require argument or proof. When you are with such people, you begin to notice the absence of struggle. You are not constantly searching for the correct phrasing, not carefully constructing sentences to avoid being misunderstood. You are simply allowed to be, and in that allowance, something within you relaxes, as if it has finally found a place where it does not need to brace itself for correction or defense. It is not that you are never misunderstood, but rather that misunderstanding does not become a weapon used against your essence. These are the connections where your truth is not placed under interrogation. You are not asked to repeatedly revisit your intentions as though they are uncertain or incomplete. Instead, there is a quiet trust that grows naturally, not because everything is always perfectly explained, but because your character is felt more deeply than it is analyzed. And this kind of recognition cannot be forced. It can only be received where there is openness. In contrast, there are spaces where you can speak endlessly and still feel unheard, where every word is examined not for meaning, but for fault. And in those spaces, even your clearest expressions begin to feel distorted, as though they are being reflected back through a surface that cannot hold your true shape. But the right people do not reflect you back in fragments. They see you in wholeness, even when you are still learning how to express it yourself. There is a deep relief in such recognition. It does not require performance. It does not demand constant explanation. It allows you to exist without feeling as though you are always under review. And in that allowance, you begin to understand what it means to be safe in connection, not because everything is always understood instantly, but because misunderstanding is met with curiosity rather than judgment. With the right people, your silence is not misinterpreted as absence, and your boundaries are not mistaken for rejection. Instead, they are met with respect, even when they are not fully understood in the moment. There is patience where there once might have been pressure, and there is presence where there once might have been interrogation. And so you begin to recognize a profound truth. You were never meant to be fully decoded by everyone who crosses your path. You were meant to be met slowly and sincerely by those who do not require you to shrink your complexity in order to be accepted. The right people do not ask you to explain your worth repeatedly. They simply stand beside you as it is already known, felt, and quietly understood without condition. Every time you choose peace over justification, you begin to notice something subtle yet life-changing returning to you. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because you have been trained by experience, by expectation, by repetition, to believe that silence means loss, that if you do not explain yourself, something important will be misunderstood forever. But in reality, what begins to return to you is not loss at all. It is you. There is a quiet reclaiming that happens when you stop rushing to defend your every intention. You start to see how much of your energy was once tied up in circles of explanation. How many moments were spent trying to be understood by those who had already decided not to understand you. And when you step away from that pattern, even slightly, you feel a strange lightness, as though something heavy you had been carrying without noticing has finally been set down. Peace, in this sense, is not passive. It is not surrender. It is an active decision to stop abandoning yourself in places where your voice is constantly required to justify its existence. Each time you choose not to engage in unnecessary defense, you are not losing your truth. You are gathering it back. Piece by piece, moment by moment, you begin to feel more whole, less scattered across conversations that were never meant to hold your depth. And yet, this choice is not always easy. There will still be moments when the old habit returns, when the urge to explain rises like a reflex. You may feel the pull to correct, to clarify, to ensure that you are seen exactly as you are. But then something softer begins to guide you, an awareness that being at peace with yourself is more important than being perfectly understood by those who were never fully present to begin with. In those moments, you begin to realize that not every misunderstanding requires your participation. Not every distortion requires your correction. Some things dissolve naturally when you step away from them, because they were never rooted in truth to begin with. And when you stop feeding them with your attention, they lose their weight in your life. Choosing peace over justification slowly teaches you where your real power lies. It is not in convincing others, but in no longer being controlled by the need to convince. It is in the quiet decision to remain centered even when others are uncertain about you. It is in trusting that your truth does not become weaker when it is questioned, nor stronger when it is defended endlessly. It simply is. And so, piece by piece, you begin to return to yourself. Not the version of you shaped by explanation or reaction, but the version of you that exists beneath all of that. The one who does not need constant approval to stand firm. The one who does not need every misunderstanding resolved in order to remain whole. The one who understands deeply and quietly that peace is not something you earn after being understood. It is something you choose even when you are not. There comes a point in life when you begin to understand that respect is not something you negotiate for through endless explanation. It is not something you earn by shrinking your truth, repeating your intentions until they are finally palatable, or reshaping your presence to make others more comfortable. Respect, in its purest form, is never built on your exhaustion. It is built on recognition, quiet, steady, and unforced. And yet, so many of us are taught directly or indirectly that being understood requires performance. We learn to over-explain, to soften our edges, to justify our emotions as if they are evidence in a case we did not choose to stand in. We begin to believe that if we can only say it better, say it clearer, say it enough times, then finally we will be seen correctly. But what slowly reveals itself is a deeper truth. Those who are committed to misunderstanding will not be convinced by perfection in your words. There is a quiet dignity that returns to you when you stop repeating yourself in spaces where your voice is not truly received. You begin to notice how often you were bending your truth just to make it fit into someone else's comfort. And in that noticing, something shifts inside you, not in anger, but in awareness. You realize that shrinking yourself did not create understanding. It only created distance from your own wholeness. You are not required to shrink, explain, or repeat yourself to be worthy of respect. This is not just a comforting idea. It is a boundary between who you are and what the world sometimes demands you become. Because every time you shrink to be accepted, a part of you quietly learns that your natural form is too much. Every time you over-explain to be believed, a part of you starts to doubt the value of your silence. And every time you repeat yourself to be validated, a part of you forgets that your truth does not lose meaning when it is not immediately understood. Real respect does not ask you to reduce yourself. It does not require you to constantly translate your existence into simpler versions just to be acknowledged. Instead, it meets you where you are, without forcing you to become smaller in order to be accepted. And where that does not exist, no amount of explanation will ever create it. There is a strength in finally allowing yourself to stop performing clarity for those who benefit from your confusion. You begin to see that your energy is not meant to be spent endlessly defending your presence. It is meant to be lived, expressed, and experienced in spaces that do not require you to fragment yourself in order to belong. And so, slowly, you step back from the need to convince. You stop repeating what was already spoken with honesty. You stop shrinking your voice to fit the expectations of those who were never truly listening. And in that stillness, you begin to understand something profound. Your worth was never waiting to be confirmed through repetition. It was always intact, even in the moments when you were not understood, even in the moments when you chose silence instead of over-explanation, even in the moments when you finally decided that being whole matters more than being approved.